Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Leading Change, the Change Leadership episode this week with Chuck Durfee. Hey, Chuck, welcome back.
Thank you. The week's half over, so this is pretty exciting.
Yeah, we're almost at the other side of the half of the week. All right, cool. So we're going to talk change and, of course, change leadership. As Scrum Masters, we are often dealing with change. In fact, that's one of those things that we deal with every single day. But you're a dev manager, an engineering leader who, of course, also has experience with change from that perspective. So I don't know which perspective you're going to take, but let's dive into that because we do want to swim in the sometimes very cold waters of change today, get us all perked up here in the morning. So tell us a story of a change process and walk us through the steps. Like, how did that change process go step by step? And as you go, highlight for us the tips, the tricks, the tools, and the techniques you learned back then that you still apply today.
Yeah, absolutely. I told you about one agile transformation in my past, so I'm going to pick on a different example. I had recently come to a company as a senior developer. I wasn't a lead at this point in my career, but I'd had a few companies under my belt and done a couple of notable things. So they asked me to implement a feature, and it turned out that I was able to manipulate the front end of this web application and make that happen for them very quickly. They were impressed. And so I found out through conversations with other people that there were a number of features like this. This company had not really started its Scrum journey. They were a couple weeks in by the time that I started, and I actually had Scrum experience, which was somewhat rare at the time. It's hard to imagine that now, sitting here in 2023, that Scrum would be unusual, but it was the case back then. And I said, there was one that was particularly bothersome to me when it was mentioned. So I said, we're going to go ahead and tackle this. And I started asking the developers around me if they could spare maybe 10 or 15 minutes a day. And I had broken this thing down into extremely small slices where one of these developers would be writing one method to do this one specific thing. And I worked as the integrator and brought this whole thing together.
So you had kind of the overview and you had split it into like small changes that all together would make like a big change.
Exactly.
Right? And then you kind of asked for volunteers. Is that correct?
Yes. Thank you, Vasco. That's exactly what happened. I had an idea about how I wanted to refactor the subsystem of the application, and ended up using what's known as the strangler pattern, where you figure out where the touch points to that subsystem are, and you slowly replace the functionality as you go along until that old subsystem is never called again, and then you can get rid of it. So that was the idea behind what I was doing. The most interesting part for management, I think, was that after a couple weeks, every morning I had like 20 developers huddled around my little cubicle, and they were wondering what was going on. And fortunately, we were at a point where we were about to ship this thing. So I said, this feature that's been in your backlog for months that you've been really wanting to get to but hasn't really risen, we're about to release this thing. We're in the middle of testing it right now. Because at that point, all the developers, I said, here, run this test case for me. And everybody was really excited about how quickly this had come about. Again, Scrum was new there, so they weren't used to this rapid delivery. Well, the person who was kind of the site leader said, hey, can you do this on a wider scale? And I said, sure. So I ended up leading their agile transformation this way. And we were talking about experiential stories the other day. This gave everybody a personal example of how breaking things up into really small pieces and coordinating could lead to really large results. So when we started running into trouble, as you always do during change initiatives, things don't work quite the way they did in the classroom, or a novel situation will occur that nobody's really thought about before. We were able to use that touchstone experience to say, look, if we just break this down and trust the process, we'll find a way through this dilemma. So I think that one day that I had just decided to try to commandeer people and make this one small thing happen led to huge dividends. We ended up delivering their year-long project a couple months early because we were able to start working so well together.
Yeah, and delivering ahead of time is actually quite easy as long as you don't have to do everything you had planned for. So I'm curious if that was part of the process. Like, did you have those feedback loops built in so that you would be able to constantly manage the scope and not let it balloon? Because it can, right?
Oh, it absolutely can. Yes. So as you I have found that as you get emerging requirements, there's a temptation to attack those things on. And as you were just alluding to, it's really important to think about whether that thing that you're after is truly necessary right now, or whether you can do it as a fast follow-up, or whether maybe if you do this one piece of work, does that mean that other pieces of related work in the same area are no longer needed or go much quicker? So using some of those techniques about thinking about the overall projects and where we might slot some of these new emerging or different requirements in really helped us stay on schedule.
And then the other aspect that kind of impressed me in this story is this idea of slicing things into small increment. Like, you didn't call it increment, you call it what did you call it? Like
I call them pieces, but yes,
pieces. Yeah.
Really small increments, yeah.
Exactly. And of course the increment idea here is that, you know, if you complete one increment, you are one step closer, right? It's not the old waterfall idea of increments, which is that only when all of them are delivered have you delivered anything, but rather that, you know, you're slowly improving the quality of the code. That's where the refactoring idea comes from in the first place. How hard was it to give that idea to the developers that volunteered to help you? Like this concept of very small changes in the code that are self-contained and productive.
Yeah, for a few, it was a tough sell, right? In part, I had to rely on this idea of just trust me, right? But I did explain how this all was going to come together to folks who were interested about what my plan was, and some of them were able to see it through there. But that art of persuasion depends on the individual.
Yeah,
it just depends on what resonates for them. Some people want to see the whole picture. Some people want the little pieces. Some people are wondering the thought process behind it all. If listeners are interested, there is a kata out there where you take a script and you're using Git, and it will reset your Git after like 2 minutes. So you need to go in to your editor, make your change, hit save, and then it'll try to revert for you. So that is an extreme example of what I was trying to accomplish with this project.
Do you remember what was the name of that kata?
I will look it up and we can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put it in the show notes. And that's one of the things. I don't know if you ever did that. So I was once trying to teach test-driven development through experiential learning, like you've been talking about this week, to managers. And I called that session test-driven development for managers. And we did the Roman numeral kata in Excel, because of course all managers use Excel, right?
And unfortunately, I'm really good at Excel now. It's true.
Exactly, right? You learn that so quickly, especially if you've been a developer before. It's an easy learn. But the thing that struck me is that development managers that used to be developers before, they did not understand or even believe that incremental development would be possible. No, you just need to know what the end looks like, and then you go there. And of course, that's not, software was never written like that. Not even they wrote it like that, but they think they did. right? And
Yeah.
this is the really striking part for me, is that many of the people who believe in this, big bang development were, when developers, they had their command line scripts to test the software. They were writing in a minute scale, like at 10 minutes, half an hour. They were testing everything they were writing all the time. But when you formalize it as test-driven development, they say, no, that's not possible, right? And I was wondering, like, did you have something like that you showed to your, at that time, developer colleagues that kind of exemplify the idea of what a small increment would look like when you were telling them about your overall idea to replace this subsystem?
I had chosen some increments early that would be demoable. So that would help illustrate my point, right? There were pieces where it was easy to call this new subsystem and see the new behavior. And those were some that I prioritized early for that very reason. Seeing is believing. And you're right, there were skeptics who felt like we would need to take 2 days aside and do this entire thing and stop the line.
And 2 days is nothing, because I've worked with companies that need to take a year off to replace an internal subsystem.
This was a small feature, right? And that's why I didn't understand why we were. That was a time when I would understand now why they didn't want to wait and derail things, but back then I didn't. I just wanted to go get it done, and it turned out that it worked well. It may not have worked well, and then I would have wasted a bunch of people's time,
But experience is a great teacher, and I'm sure that at that time you already had experience that it worked. And
I did. I had enough to make it work out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But all in all, a great set of steps to follow if you do need to introduce refactoring to your team and they seem reluctant, because these are small things. You can show results immediately. You don't need people to work on it for days, or even in some cases, I guess, not even for hours. Like even 15, 20 minutes for small changes can be enough that end up in a large refactoring for an internal subsystem. So thank you for sharing that story, Chuck.
Oh, you're welcome, Vasco.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.